eCapitol News Director Sean Ashley has more on the budget negotiations and other news at the Capitol. Sean, the Senate appears cool toward the budget agreement that's being reported in the House. What does that mean for this deal?
Well, what we saw on Friday is that it does face some major challenges. One of the components of that deal, a plan to expand casino gaming in the state of Oklahoma, failed in the Senate Joint Committee on Appropriations and Budget. That means unless it can be reworked in some way that is likable to the members of the Senate, it probably will not advance and will not be put in front of the governor. That only amounted to approximately $40 million of what has been described as a $400 million plan, but it still does impact their efforts to raise additional revenue. Also on Friday, the Senate Joint Committee on Appropriations and Budget approved a measure that would limit individual income tax deductions to $17,000 with the exception of charitable deductions. However, that measure narrowly passed by simply one vote. Now, if this bill had been being heard on the floor, it would not have passed. A number of members were absent from the Joint Committee on Appropriations and Budget meeting, and many of those individuals are people who have voted no on other measures that were designed to increase tax revenues. So if that measure makes it to the floor, it looks like it faces an uphill battle. Overall, the Senate has sort of been the chamber of no when it comes to measures to raise revenue this session, and it looks like it continues to be so.
Wow. Besides the budget, what else are lawmakers working on in the final weeks of the session?
Well, we are in the final 2 weeks of the legislative session, so there are a lot of bills that are awaiting consideration that are in conference committees, and we're waiting to see what that final language will look at. One area of interest in particular is that of criminal justice reform. As you'll recall, Governor Mary Fallin created a task force on criminal justice reform that met over the summer and into the fall and made a number of recommendations designed to lower the number of prisoners in Oklahoma in the Department of Corrections. Those measures have yet to make it to her desk. Many of them are sitting in those conference committees and awaiting final consideration, awaiting final language to be put in them for members to vote on. I think that is one of the most closely watched areas in the coming week.
So, Sean, what are you expecting for next week?
As we enter this week, on Friday, May 19th, is the deadline for revenue measures to be considered. That's a requirement under the Oklahoma Constitution that prohibits revenue increasing measures from being discussed in the House or the Senate during the final 5 days of the legislative session. So they have simply this next week to deal with those matters. I expect then that we'll see a lot of activity in the joint committees on appropriations and budget and on the House and Senate floors dealing with those revenue increasing measures.
Sean Ashley with eCapitol, you have a lot of work ahead next week. Thanks for being with us.
You're very welcome.